I mean, it's not like it's being a hands off type of thing. People that take structure. I've done it. I've taken used, yeah.
We'll just wait a
I'll
few
give
more minutes.
instruction, you can give a go. I heard.
Well, now, Sandra, what do you think? Bring one at this time.
We should just wait about 2 more minutes.
Sure.
All right, well, why don't we get started and let the others joining late can catch up. I want to welcome everyone to our March 2023 SHRS Innovation Institute seminar. We're really fortunate today to have two speakers from Heartio, Utkars Jain and Adam Butchy. They're both leads in the company, but they're interesting. They're also both PhD candidates in bioengineering here at the University of Pittsburgh. So I'll just give a little background on Utkars first. He is, as I said, currently a bioengineering student here, candidate. He's writing his thesis on AI interpretation of medical tests. I think that's what we're going to hear about today. He has a background in applied mathematics and has worked on the Google AI Hub. He is the technical lead and works full-time at the company, refining, training, and testing the model and product. Adam, also a PhD candidate at Pitt, has 8 years of experience in life science research, 2 years of regulatory experience, and 5 successful submissions to the FDA. Wow, that's great. Adam is the regulatory lead and works full-time at the company. He crafts the submissions and manages the meetings with the FDA. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to you two guys and take us away.
Everyone, let me just find our presentation really quick, and then I will get started. Can everyone see the slide deck? Okay, so the topic of our presentation is medical device entrepreneurship. Our lessons learned, and yes, you can do it too, but the you can do it too is, I think, more of a discussion portion towards the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt the presentation or save your question till the end. Either way is fine. If you think you're gonna forget your question, ask it. So like we were introduced, I'm Utkars Jain, and my co-founder is Butchy. We'll be presenting this slide deck today. So entrepreneurship is broadly defined as the activity of setting up a business or businesses and taking financial risk in hope of making a profit. And that's something that any startup who gets founded wants to do. They're taking a risk, they're foregoing current income, or they're foregoing other opportunities in order to take a risk to create a bigger profit down the line. Some examples of entrepreneurship are listed on the screen here: Apple, NVIDIA, Oracle, even some Pittsburgh ones here: Robotics, Millie's, and Heartio. So a lot of people ask, what is the roadmap to creating a successful startup? And it would be perfect if there were some one-size-fits-all solution for a startup. If you were able to have an idea, form a company, create it, and then whatever goes in the middle, and then profit at the end. But unfortunately, that is not as easy as it seems. And the reason for that is that there's so many different factors that actually impact how your startup needs to look, feel, perform. And these can include the industry that you're in, whether you're in medical devices or materials or hospitality or finance. Your experience and the experience of your co-founders. Have you started another company before? Have you been successful in that? If you have been, that's going to really make things a little bit easier for you, even if you're switching industries. What is your idea? What problem does it solve? How big of a problem does it solve? Where are you located? Is it easy for you to find partners and potential customers in your area? And what are the regulations to your product? Is it something that's easy to overcome? Is it something that's a lot harder and requires a lot more funding and capital? And what is the competition? Are there a lot more people that could shift into your space, or are you going to be the only one in your niche? So all those have to be taken into account before you create a path or follow a path. But we're not here to talk about your specific path. We're here to talk about lessons that we've learned. And we can't tell you how to do it or what to do or how long it'll take, but we're going to talk about some of the lessons that we've learned, and hopefully that will be of some use. So when you are creating your idea and advancing your idea, the world of startups is crazy. There's not many people that have had successful startups. And the number one thing that you should know is that they're risky. Many startups fail, even many small businesses fail. And you should know your level of personal risk tolerance before you move on to founding a startup and putting a lot of work into it. Not saying that you are going to fail or it's going to be overly tenuous, but something that you should keep in mind. And another big lesson that we've learned is not take risks on other people's behalfs. And this is something that was told to us a couple of times, but if someone wants to do something and they have no stake in the company or your own life, maybe rethink doing that. And make sure you believe in the idea that you're espousing, and believe that you are the one that needs to make it happen. Because if you're not, that's going to be a little bit more difficult when the time gets not as good. And you need to hold on to a belief that you're in the right place and that you're doing the right thing. And another second very important lesson is to obsess over the problem. And what I mean by problem is, what is your product or idea trying to solve? Who benefits from it? And how much is that said benefit? And is your benefit enough to actually change the behavior of your customer? And who has the most amount of pain? And why do they have the most amount of pain? And though this seems like a one-time research-based thing, it's actually, I would say, a more continuous way of going about your business and understanding the needs of your consumer and understanding what is your product actually solving. And it's something that could change because there's just the way that your entire path is dependent on so many different factors. The problem is also dependent on so many different factors. And at least for us, we want to keep apprised of where we lie in the solution space of the problem. And that's something that I would suggest everyone to do on a continual basis. Keep on understanding the problem, keep on understanding the pain points, keep understanding who is impacted, and if your product actually solves their problem enough to change their behavior. And so when you're advancing your idea, you're thinking about the problem. The next thing that usually is done is figuring out who is going to be your partner, who's going to be your co-founder, and how are you going to split up the equity or the value of the business. So equity is basically worthless in the beginning. So it's a little bit more difficult to conceptualize the value of the company, right? 25% of zero is still zero. But if you have a successful company, that 25% could end up being a very large number. And if you are working with people that may not have the same intangibles as you, or someone who does not want to take as much risk and they're getting the same amount of equity, it could lead to a lot of division within teams. So our lesson is to make sure that when you pick your co-founders, make sure it's a person that you want to work with, someone that has the same ideas in mind, same goals for the company, and someone that will work with you to solve problems, not someone who will get in the way of the company. And for many people have researched splitting and how much to give to each partner. Usually equal equity splits are thought to be best. I think Y Combinator has an entire page about this if you're interested in splitting equity for your company. So when you go about forming your company, there's many different paths you can take. You can become a C Corp, a S Corp, LLC, benefit corporation. These are all different names for a entity that is created that will house IP, liability, etc. for a corporation. Now, this is something that you can do by yourself. You can go through LegalZoom or however it may be, but we definitely recommend going through a legal counsel like K&L Gates. And this is because they can tell you about potential pitfalls, get you started up with registered agents, and figure out all the nitty-gritty details that you may not know and what to look out for when you are successful or you're bringing on more partners or advisors and things like that. It also helps when you have legal counsel just to get their advice, because they've been through the startup creation process. They've also been through fundraising and things like that, and that they're always a great resource for that, though it does cost money. And one more thing that is a really important lesson is to really understand the regulations of your industry and your space and your product. For specifically medical devices, there are 3 major regulatory paths to go through with the FDA: the 510K pathway, the 510K de novo, and the pre-market approval pathway. And not the actual reason why they're different is not that important, but the important thing is to understand what is the risk level of your device and which pathway does it have to take. And the reason that is because these 3 different pathways, as with many other industries with different regulatory pathways, require different amounts of testing and capital and employees. And so really understanding what it takes to get your device to market is very important and where you should spend a lot of time. If you're working on a device or product that doesn't require that many regulations, I would say make sure that it doesn't require that many regulations. See what your competitors have done. But also, if it doesn't, then that's a low barrier to entry. And that means you might not have to do as much, but other competitors might not have to do as much either. So there's other ways that you would need to create protection for yourself and for your product. And another thing that we really want to stress is that you have to understand and make sure that you have found product market fit. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but the number one reason why startups fail is because they create a product that no one wants, no one has the need for, or something that does solve a problem, but not enough to actually get people to buy it. So make sure when you create that product and it has this value proposition, this value that you're proposing to the end user, to the stakeholder, that it actually serves their problem, that actually serves their unmet need. And that's enough for you to propose to them that they actually purchase it, pay you for it, and use it. Because if that doesn't happen, then you don't really have a business. You have a product that can't be sold. And another thing that a lot of people think is you want to keep the ideas that you have very close to your chest, that you don't want to divulge information about your startup or your idea to other people because they will steal it. And this may keep your idea secret, but it also might hinder advancement of your idea and might also hinder feedback that would make your idea better. So I would recommend, and I think we would recommend, get your idea to as many people that you trust as possible. Get their thoughts and feedback, opinions, see how they feel about your idea. If you can explain your idea to someone and they understand it and they think that it works and there's a good market for it, then I think that tells you that you're in a good spot. If someone listens to your idea, listens to your pitch, and they think, oh, I don't really understand what's the uses for this product, maybe this is something that makes you go back to the drawing board and think about how to, one, explain your product, but also, does it actually solve the unmet need? And if you find people through this process that you trust, that supply you with really good feedback and supply you with a lot of time on their end, maybe it's time to make them more formal advisors through option plans or some sort of contract. And so on the screen here from CB Insights, we have the 20 reasons that startups fail. The number one reason is no market need, and 2 is run out of cash, and then 3 is not the right time. And these are things that you can mostly control. Maybe not the right time, but you can see where the market is and see where if there's an appetite for purchasing your product and using your product, or if it's not the right time, maybe not spend as much money. So I would say that always make sure that you are abreast as to what the market conditions are like. If your plan to sell your product works, if the market will actually accept your product, and if it actually meets the needs of the end consumer. Because if that doesn't happen, then there's a large chance that your startup will fail. So make sure before it gets to that point, you're doing all the work beforehand to make sure these reasons do not happen. And another thing is to make sure you keep reasonable expectations. There are a lot of startups that are on different paths, that have people with different experiences, different levels of funding, etc. You should not compare yourself to any other startup. You are your own very individual startup. Your idea is your own, and you should make sure that you are concentrated on advancing that idea and doing all the steps that are necessary to get that idea to fruition. And another thing that we have struggled with before is actually setting unreasonable timelines, meaning thinking that something will take 6 months when it might take a year and a half. And that's something that comes with experience. That's something we know now how to budget and create lengths of time for. But there's no reason to think and push yourself to do something in an unreasonable amount of time. And final thing here is that holdups happen, meaning that you might expect something to be done by a third party in X amount of time, but they take much longer than you expect. That's something that you have no control over. And instead of getting worried about the fact you don't have control over it, just accept that that is just the reality of the situation And the most important thing is to keep on going. So don't let a third party hold you up. Don't let that situation get you down. Just make sure you're tenacious. You're still working towards the goal that you have in mind. And finally, raising money. One lesson that we've learned is that you have many different opportunities to raise money, whether it be from competitions, family and friends, angel investors, institutional investors, or even grants. But the most important thing is to find partners through this process. So these are people that want to help you succeed, but won't get too deep into the nitty-gritty with you, holding up your progress with their own thoughts and opinions. Now that might mean that they are there as an advisor and in that advisory role, but they're not trying to be in the operational role with you, because that means that there'll be too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. So make sure you find people who understand the problem, understand your product, want to help you, but are pretty hands off when they help you. And yep, thank you. We'll take any questions. I'm sure that this did not cover all the possible lessons that we've learned. So I think we'll take the rest of the time for any sort of discussion that people want to have.
Thanks, Utkar. That was really good information. I'm curious from your personal experience, what was number one and number two mistakes that you made?
I think the number one mistake that we made was we were very excited about starting the company. So we had a lot of people who were co-founders who are not co-founders right now. And some of them might have equity and things like that. And if we knew that ahead of time, we wouldn't have granted that these earlier co-founders equity and whatever. So just make sure that the people that you bring on board are people that will be with you thick and thin, and people and just that entire early process. And the second thing is just, I guess, setting unreasonable timelines, just making sure that you have people with experience who could really let you know that you're being unreasonable with something, that know how long things usually take, because as a startup, you're not going to be the priority of a lot of third parties.
Yep. No, I think you hit those two problems really well. In your presentation, you mentioned that you want to divide equity fairly, so that everyone is incentivized to really push the company forward. So when we were co-founding our company, we had, I think, a total of 5 people, and we went through an exercise to determine who was providing value to the company in what areas, how much we weighted that expertise or that knowledge, and really tried to structure the equity stakes such that everyone was motivated based on their experience and what they brought to the table. So I think that really helped in a lot of respects. And we also had amazing legal counsel that really instructed us that we should set it up such that founders did not start getting equity until about a year or two down the road, which really helped when some of our co-founders had to leave within that first 1 or 2 years. So the structure of that is called a vesting cliff. And so you have to put in a certain amount of time or experience in order to start getting equity in the company. And I think listening to that counsel really helped.
Well,
Can you tell us a little bit about your IP and who owns it, or do you license it, and how did it come about? How did you develop it?
Sure. Do you want me to take that, Utkars?
Sure.
Yeah. So we view intellectual property in kind of like a three-legged stool. On one hand, we have patents. On another hand, we have regulatory protections, and on the third hand, we have trade secrets and copyrights. We built this multi-legged approach for a few different reasons. The intellectual property we own is wholly owned by our company. That was one of the first tasks we went out when we started forming the company. Utkars and I were students at the University of Pitt. We know that Pitt has a relatively good claim to research developed in-house. And so we wanted to make the argument that Utkars had developed all the intellectual property while he was a student at Pitt and therefore was not subject to that intellectual property claim. We went through an independent lawyer and were able to get a letter from the university saying that all intellectual property was property of Utkars and the company that he formed. So in one leg, that's the intellectual property of patents. Based on that intellectual property, we went through a patent lawyer and were recently granted a patent from the US protecting the core piece of our technology, covering our medical device and the process through which it renders a decision. In that second leg of the stool, the regulatory approach, we've targeted a means of getting FDA approval that will also give us protection post clearance / approval. Regulatory burden is scary to a lot of investors. So it also gives you a little bit of protection or an added hurdle for competitors that want to come in after you've been cleared or approved. So we are targeting the PMA approval pathway because even though it is a higher hurdle to clear, it gives you protections on the back half so that people cannot 510K your device and face a lower hurdle to enter the market. And then finally, trade secrets and copyrights. So these are things that are a little more nebulous and do not have the protection of a patent, but are still part of our intellectual property strategy. Software is notoriously difficult to patent, extremely difficult to protect. And so the kind of the secret sauce of how our algorithm works, how it's able to render a decision, is purely a trade secret that we are very hush-hush about.
Ridiculously in San Diego.
I'm kind of curious about, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to throw a question to Utkars. Could you talk a little bit about how we raised funding? I know in Pittsburgh and companies in the Pittsburgh region sometimes sometimes complain that there is not sufficient money. So how did you go about raising funding for your idea?
Yeah, so Heartio had a recently closed seed round of $1.3 million. And I would say around 75% of that money came from Pittsburgh and people in Pittsburgh. And the way that we came about this is just basically going through the network that we had. So the main initial investor was actually an associate of the legal counsel that we had. And he had recently closed a exit for a cardiovascular medical device company, which was a great combination between us and him. And so he was our initial investor, and then he knew other people in the area that would be interested in the product. And then basically that's just how we rolled from that point onward, is getting that initial investor, getting him excited, showing that we could do more progress with the initial funding, and then getting more people interested in getting more people invested.
I'm curious about your business model. You know, where are you with this product, and what's your plan?
Yeah, I can probably hand it off to Adam after we get to the regulatory piece, but right now we are in the clinical stage. We have to get through a pivotal study. After we do the pivotal study, we have to submit an application for pre-market approval to the FDA. And after we get that accepted and approved, then we can begin selling. And in terms of the business model, the most common business model in medical devices is fee for service, getting a little bit of money every single time a test is used. And then on the back end, the user will be able to get reimbursement for that test. So it makes sense for both parties. With the value-based care model now coming into a lot of hospital systems, we're thinking maybe to have a dual approach where we have a software as a service where there's a monthly cost for using the technology, plus a fee for service that's a little bit smaller than it would be otherwise. But I'll let Adam talk about the regulatory approach and why we chose to go that route.
Yeah, I can talk about that. Just to kind of go back to the business model part though. Utkars mentioned during his presentation that it's really important to know your customers, and also all the stakeholders that have say in the purchase decision. And so our business model really accents our understanding of the stakeholders in healthcare, as well as who is going to be our end users and what they're going to be using it on. So I don't know about the audience and whether or not they have innovation in this space. We can talk pretty knowledgeably about healthcare and whatnot, but if you can understand healthcare business model, I think you can really apply it anywhere else, because healthcare is very complicated and probably one of the more complicated business uses. So our business model really tries to accent the many stakeholders along the chain. The three biggest that people understand are the patient, because you're using a medical device on them, the healthcare provider, so the hospital or the doctor that is rendering aid to the patient, and then the medical payer, which is a big thing in the United States that usually pays for the healthcare being provided. And so you really want a business model that works in combination with these three key stakeholders, that financially incentivizes them to use your product, and also ensures the best outcome for the patient. So really early on, we struggled with kind of like feedback from mentors and advisors, because we really thought we had a medical test that was going to be so good for patients, and like it was dumbfounding to us, like why it would not work. And the pushback that we kept getting was, you really need to understand the key stakeholders in this space and who is paying for it, or making sure that even if it is better for patients, how are you going to incentivize doctors to adopt it and insurance providers to pay for it? And so, like Utkars mentioned, fee-for-service is the largest business model in this space. We are using that as our primary business model, but we're also trying to be a little more flexible with the change we see in the healthcare system, leaning towards value-based care, but also potentially exploring like a software as a service business model, because that lends more to value-based care. Sorry, that was a long rambling answer, and I got a little distracted by the chat. It looks like we might have a question. In your presentation, you cite 42% of failures as tied to an insufficient market need. How are you validating the market need for Heartio? Utkars, would you like to take that, or shall I?
Sure. You can probably add some more details than I can. So in terms of our market need, we identified that Heartio has a technology that can use ECGs to detect coronary artery disease. And so there's no current early stage test that can definitively say whether or not a patient has coronary artery disease as quickly and accurately as we can. And now to validate that market need, first we have to show in a pivotal study and many additional validation studies that yes, we can in fact do this on many different groups of patients. Second is to go to the FDA and show that this has a level of safety and efficacy that would be beneficial to the end consumer and to physicians and to hospital systems. And if we get approval, then the next step is to get market validation through clinicians and physicians and nurses and whoever will be using our technology through conferences, publications, etc. So it's really getting through the clinical validation aspect, getting through the regulatory aspect, and then getting clinical adoption in our case. It might be a little bit different for other industries. Market need is sort of a nebulous subject as well. But for us, it's definitely getting the validation, getting the regulatory approval, and then getting clinical adoption. And if all those three things happen, then we can be rest assured that at least in some way we are fulfilling a market need.
Yeah, that is phenomenal. The one piece I want to add is this is a great question about how do you de-risk ventures. And so every investor that you talk to, anyone who is interested in your company is going to ask, like, how have you validated that people are going to buy it? So you have to understand the stakeholders of who is making the purchasing decision, what they care about when considering products to buy, and validating that. So we've conducted a lot of customer discovery of hospital administrators, insurance providers, as well as primary care physicians, emergency medicine physicians, and cardiologists to make sure that they're interested in technology that has higher accuracy, faster, non-invasive, and trying to determine and piece out the attributes of the product that they care about, trying to assess roughly how much they'd be willing to pay for it, and seeing if that works in tandem with, like Utkars is saying, our clinical validation, our regulatory strategy, and our like go-to-market plan. So yeah, it's a very good question. It's also a very big question, and it really comes down to customer discovery and those interviews.
I'm interested in your clinical study and, you know, how you got connected with your whatever partners you needed to do that and how that's all worked out.
Yeah, so the major study that we have going around right now is around a 17,000 patient study with the Allegheny Health Network. And the way we got connected with them was just through multiple interactions with them through the years, until we reached a point at which we were ready and they were ready to begin a study. And so this was a pretty large undertaking because we were using a registry that they had used or had fulfilled or filled out before, but not in this manner. And so, you know, it took a year of getting the IP straight, getting everyone knowing what their responsibilities and roles were. But after that, then it took a little bit of time to actually get the data and pair it up with the data we needed. So it was mostly, you know, conversing with them over and over again, and then reaching a point where both of us were comfortable in saying, we think this will be a successful study that will be publishable and that will be show benefits for both of us.
Yeah. Just to talk a little bit more historically, like our first clinical validation piece was, I think, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, and it was a smaller study of only around 1,000 patients. So when it comes to clinical validation, a metaphor that gets used a lot, for traction and clinical validation, a metaphor that gets used a lot is kind of like a snowball rolling down a hill. It usually starts small, it gains momentum, and throughout this course, it's increasing in speed and size as it goes down the hill. We started small. We approached cardiologists at a small clinical consulting firm that we knew had ECGs and we knew that had patient outcomes, and we tried to run a study with them. They only had roughly 1,000 patients, and we were so early then that we were like, 1,000 patients is phenomenal. Like, of course we'll do this. And so we worked with them to go through an IRB to define the clinical protocol. And because they were so small, they really gave us a lot of hands-on attention. They worked with us, and we were able to run the study in like 6 months, which is really quick. But luckily, like all of these patients had already been seen, and we were just using database patient files. So we had to clear IRB, but once we had the protocol, we could run the study relatively quickly, and we got that published at a Canadian Journal of Cardiology. Once we got that published, like it was much easier to get interest from other hospital sites and people wanting to run that study. So that's when we started the 17,000 patient study with AHN. We were aligned on like they're geographically close to us, they're interested in this type of research, and they had the patient files that we were looking for. And then since then, we've also been approaching a few hospitals to run either different studies or slightly connected studies to other hospitals in the United States and also around the world. So for clinical validation, it's difficult to get started, but you're really trying to build that narrative of growth and plausibility. So we've been trying to do that pretty well.
Do you plan to do any prospective studies, or is the FDA going to ask you for that information?
Yeah, so I never know how much information is confidential. I think we've said it publicly, but our pivotal study is going to be a prospective study. We're working with the FDA now to finalize the protocol for our pivotal study. Just a little bit of background. A pivotal study is kind of your final study in an FDA submission that says, if we clear this study, the FDA is pretty sure that we are safe and effective for use. So it's pivotal because it kind of marks a large change in your submission to the FDA. So that's our pivotal study. It'll be prospective. And from there, we're also looking at maybe a phase 4 trial that looks at, once we are able to be sold to a hospital network, how do we affect reimbursement, patient readmissions, and long-term outcomes? So we're trying to build a clinical evidence, and we're also trying to build that that reimbursement evidence, which will be important for insurance providers and doctors.
That sounds great. How long is all that going to take?
That comes down to timelines, and we are notoriously bad at estimating timelines. So I'll plead the fifth, or I'll send it to Utkars.
So right now we're estimating the pivotal study itself should take 1 to 2 years. The length of time to get to that point is sort of up in the air. So, I would say 2 to 4 years is a good window for completing the pivotal study.
It looks like Karen has also posted in the chat talking about customer discovery. Yes, definitely take advantage of the NSF iCorps program, of which the University of Pitt is one of the universities there. Definitely, they will help you get your pitch off the ground, your company off the ground. I think a staple of the iCorps program is conducting a certain amount of interviews, and I think a little bit of funding as well, like a small grant. So definitely talk to Karen or other resources at Pitt about how to get your budding idea off the ground.
I've been kind of monopolizing the questions. Anybody else have any questions? Any more words of wisdom, guys?
I will say that, like, if you are interested in medical device innovation or drug development, or really any type of innovation that has to go through a regulated body, it can be very daunting or scary, and maybe seem infeasible. I just want to say that there are plenty of resources out there to de-risk that piece, as well as try to, for your own well-being, like, break big problems down into little steps and then just go about tackling each step along the chain, because that, like, any problem seems insurmountable until you break it down into a step-by-step process of how you get there. For the FDA, like, I remember I was terrified about having to be approved by the FDA, but really talking to advisors and mentors, going back and forth with the FDA myself, as well as relying on resources at the University of Pitt, has really helped de-risk our venture, as well as make it look more feasible and more possible. So anxiety and fears related to your idea are not bad. They tell you what you have to focus on and what you have to do, but don't get overwhelmed. Just take it one step at a time.
Yeah, and the one thing that I always like to say is the number one attribute that I think for any co-founder or any founder of a company is tenacity and the ability to just keep on going no matter what happens. If you believe in your idea so strongly that you believe that you have to be the person to make it come to fruition, into reality, then nothing should get in the way of making that happen. And just be tenacious. Even if you can only give a couple of hours a week to the idea, I think you should do it, and just keep on doing it for as long as you can. Obviously, there's that concept of failing quickly. If you would rather want to find out that there's no market need for your product earlier than later, but at the same time, your product best. So As long as you're tenacious about it, I think that's the number one thing you can be.
I did have a question if I could put one out there quick on the regulatory side. How long did you said you worked with advisors and a number of people? How did you also work with an FDA consultant that kind of helped hold your hand and walk you through it, or did you do a lot of it yourself and make a few mistakes and just keep pushing through?
Absolutely. So, in the in the effort to be as transparent as possible, our first submission to the FDA, we got a letter back from the FDA in a week, and we're like, please withdraw your request. This is a terrible submission, and it does not warrant FDA time. So that was back in 2017, 2018, and we were just getting off the ground because we were doing a lot of it ourselves. And that really opened my eyes, like, oh, we've got to take this really seriously. It's got to cross some baseline threshold that warrants their time and attention. Since then, we have submitted 5 submissions to the FDA. We have never gotten that letter again. And we have done the majority of it in-house. With a startup, you are constantly balancing time and money. And so early on, you have no time, you have no money and a lot of time. And then as that goes on, it inverts and you start to have more money and less time. So since we were interested in being lean, we didn't have a lot of money to throw around, and we were graduate students, I really spent a lot of time coming to terms with what the FDA expects, what we can submit, and how to really build a regulatory strategy. That being said, I have leveraged resources at the University of Pitt. There was a consultant that used to volunteer time to the university as well as to LifeX, Michael Nilo. I think he's still active in the Pittsburgh area, and so we leaned on his advice. And yeah, we did a lot of it. We did most of it in-house. That being said, we are slowly inverting. And last week, both Utkars and I interviewed 2 FDA consultants to kind of take what we've developed and start doing that more on them than on us, because our time is becoming more valuable.
Yeah, because as you stated, as you dig into the FDA, it is completely overwhelming, even if you have the most basic of submissions, just in the way it's written and the amount of standards to dig through. So I appreciate that input, and it might require just, as you said, a little bit more of a very distinct focus. But we've also interviewed a few consultants as well, and we're on that edge of time versus money equation, just as you stated.
Absolutely. That being said, Utkars and I love to give back. If you want to connect outside of this, I'm happy to look over what you're doing, offer some advice. Obviously, you don't have to pay me, but also my advice might be trash. So you got to take that with a grain of salt. But I'm happy to help. I'm always happy to give back to Pitt Innovation.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. I don't see any more questions popping up, so I think we'll draw this to a close. Adam, Utkars, it's been great having you, hearing about your experience, learning, getting advice from you. It's been very valuable. Really appreciate you doing this. If it's okay with you, can we post this on the website for people to come and view, and it could be a lasting resource for us?
Of course, yeah, and you can give our emails as well if anyone has any questions that they want to reach out to us about later on as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. See you, everyone.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, you heard the thing about all that.
That was really interesting. I enjoyed that, Karen.
Yeah. I actually wrote down the name of the regulatory person they mentioned. So maybe we could contact him for future seminars,
Could be.
if you think that would be good.
Right, so you can stop the recording.
Handle the other one.